Welcome to Bold Voices, Good Yarns. I'm your host, Ian Henzel. Behind every book lies an author's life story. So join me on an interactive journey as we step between the pages to explore how an author's life and their experiences have shaped the stories that we cherish and love. So sit back, relax, grab a cup of joe or a cocktail, and join me as we step between the pages. Welcome, everyone. I'm Ian Henzel, and I'm the host here at Bold Voices, Good Yarns. And today we are going to be stepping between the pages with author Jobert Abueva, and we're going to be talking about his new memoir, Boy Wonder, a coming-of-age memoir. So welcome, Jobert.
Thank you, Ian. It is good to see you again. How are you doing?
Excellent. It's great to see you. So this is a little bit different from some of the other authors we've had on the show because everyone else so far, well, with the exception of one person, have written fiction. And this is a memoir. And let me just fill people in. So Jobert, you grew up in the Philippines, didn't you?
That's right. The Philippines, I was born there. But after that, because my father was nomadic, he was what I call a roving academic. Before we knew it, we found ourselves everywhere from Brooklyn to Kathmandu, Nepal to Bangkok, Thailand. I went back to the Philippines and I spent 8th through 12th grade in Tokyo, Japan before I came to America for college. So a lot of jumping around, indeed.
Which is in your memoir. Your father worked for the UN University, if
That's
I'm not
correct.
mistaken.
That's right. You remember well. He was assigned to the United Nations University, which is headquartered in Tokyo, Japan. But what led up to that were all these stints he had. He was a visiting professor at places like Yale and City University of New York. And he also worked for the Ford Foundation. But it was the United Nations that took us to Japan and allowed me to spend 5 wonderful years as a high schooler.
And I don't want to reveal too much, but let's just say that Jobert had a rather unusual after school job. It was not delivering newspapers, was it?
No, I wasn't, and we'll keep that between ourselves until folks perhaps read the book. But yeah, let's just say I was very active as a student leader in my academics. I really excelled in a lot of activities on campus. I enjoyed it very much. But the thing about Tokyo is that it's a huge megalopolis. And actually, it's very safe. Your parents don't worry about your wanderings about the huge city because it's perhaps one of the safest cities in the world. Now, that's a plus, but I think the potential downside of that is parents don't necessarily know what their children are up to. So that's where the so-called trouble begins.
So you were, let's say, exploring your identity at a
Mhm.
5-star hotel in Tokyo.
Yes. So, I have lots of inklings as early as maybe 5, 6 years old, where you started to sense that maybe you were a bit different. I was interested about around the male figures around me, and wanting to be close to them and be participating in their conversations and whatnot. So I had a sense then that maybe I was attracted to other boys, male figures. And so that was really a secret all this time, regardless of where I was living. But there was something about Tokyo. Again, you're a teenager. You want to be free and about, and Tokyo was safe. So after school, my friends and I, we would enjoy things like going to the game center, having a curry or some ramen noodles. But before dinner, I had some free time. So I explored a lot of Tokyo and found myself at the Imperial Hotel, not far from the Imperial Palace. And that's where we'll just say that some interesting conversations, which led to connections with guests from around the world, transpired.
And some pocket money, as I recall.
Yeah, yeah. That did transpire. It wasn't necessarily something I was looking for, but it kind of became part of the adventure, right? When folks were actually propositioning me and suggesting that there may be a monetary reward attached to our connection. That's kind of where it all started.
Which is, so I worked and I was living in the US, but I worked quite a bit in Asia in my former life. And there's sometimes, an expectation or the way Westerners act towards Asians that's a little bit different.
Hmm.
It was very interesting to me. And, I think folks will let the cover with the hang tag on the door handle of a hotel room door kind of clue you in to what was going on. So you grew up, so now the school, before we go into your growing up years, the school was a Catholic boys' school, wasn't it?
That's correct. Yeah, it was St. Mary's International School. It was run by the Brothers of Christian Instruction, who all happened to be from Quebec, from Montreal. So my parents, we were raised Catholic, and my parents wanted to always somehow find a school setting that continued to raise me as a good Catholic boy. We did not have that when I was in Kathmandu. I actually went to British primary school there. But when I arrived in Tokyo, they said, we'll put you in here. One, I continued to study catechism, and it was a phenomenally international setting. So I had friends and classmates from all over the world. And we were all teenager boys, right? And you know how it is amongst teenager boys, eighth grade and up. A lot of fun, but also troublemakers, right?
Well, let's say that I guess that the St. Mary's, was your high school. And then after school, you went to finishing school at the Imperial Hotel.
You can put it that way. Yes, yes. So I know we're talking about something that seems out of the ordinary and perhaps a little scandalous. Here I am, a teenager in this adult setting. But many many years now since then, I can say in retrospect, oddly, how much I appreciated the experience. I was exposed to a lot of interesting folks from all walks of life, interesting careers. I got to engage with them. At the time, maybe I really connected more well with folks who were more mature than myself. We actually had deep conversations about a lot of topics. And I think that's probably part of the appeal people had of me. And to your point earlier, they see this young Asian kid hanging out in the shopping arcade at the hotel. They strike up conversation. They approach you as if you probably don't speak much English. So I would get these pigeon English, hi, how are you, sort of thing. And then I respond the way I respond. And then they're startled. Oh, okay, you can speak English. So that kind of like started the ball rolling. And then they just went ahead and eventually got to some suggestion or proposition as to what they were interested in pursuing with me.
Well, for me, your memoir is very relatable. It came out after high school. I had just graduated high school, so it was about a few weeks before my 18th birthday. And I was often attracted to older men, older being 25, 30, 40. And, I grew up in a very working class environment in Brooklyn, and it was really my finishing school. It was my enculturation. I learned a lot about culture. I learned a lot about the world. So, like you, I look back on it very fondly, and I think it contributed to my appreciation of things. I was exposed to things that I'd never been exposed to before. And, and also for me, it gave me a vision of when I finished college and when I went my career going forward, that I could be, these were all successful men who had careers, and it really, they provided the role models that I could be like that. I could, you know, be gay and I can have a career. And so, I consider myself very fortunate, so I can relate.
Yeah. It's a very different era, right, Ian? Then we did not have many resources or outlets to express ourselves sexually and who we were, our identities. A very different era compared to today, where it's a lot more in the open. And maybe folks today don't necessarily have to go after the types of situations we found ourselves in. And today, they would also be considered extremely illegal and dangerous,
Mm.
perhaps, because I was underage for most of that time. But again, to your point, it was a bit of a finishing school. I learned a lot. I think I gained a lot of confidence and social skills and a bit of entrepreneurship. So these are all skills you want kids to learn. But maybe this is not necessarily the suggested way of doing so. We'll put
You
it.
know, it's how we also interpret these experiences, and I've always interpreted it as being very positive. And you know, I was 18, so I was legal age, but I looked about 14, which was, I've never quite looked my age. So, you know, now I'm going to be 70, and people are
And you
always
don't look
shocked.
your age.
I don't, I've got a picture in the attic that's getting older. So, how did your upbringing, you know, it was a very international upbringing. How did it shape your worldview?
Right. So I think the fact that my father, I'll never forget, my father always said there are two things that he would never skimp on, meaning he was willing to spend money on. One was food, but the other thing was education, right? And he saw any opportunity for him to travel abroad and bring his family, he considered that education. He being a man of the world, he wanted to instill in us this notion of being a global citizen early on, even in the 70s and 80s. So I thank my father for doing that, for enabling us to experience all these cultures, because eventually, as an adult, I ended up with a global marketing career. And my marketing career has taken me all over the world. I've lived in the UK. I worked all over Central and Eastern Europe. I had an expat assignment in China as well, and then in Bangkok, Thailand. And to this day, even though I've shifted from industry to industry, I was in beauty care, the energy sector, I'm now in education, assessments, all of these roles have international components to them. And I do believe part of why I've ended up in these roles is because my view of the world was shaped by my father bringing us all over the place and opening up all those opportunities to learn about cultural differences. And the reality is that for all the diversity there is in the world, humans are humans, and we're so similar. So huge benefit because of my father and the doors he opened up for me international.
And it was a very academic sort of environment that you grew up in. What was the trigger for you to, or the catalyst for you to write a memoir about your experience?
Sure, sure. So I really started this memoir really relatively later in life. So I'm over 60. I started it 20 years ago. So I was about 40. And I really never thought about writing. I was wanting to remember certain episodes from my childhood and upbringing that I thought were really unique. And if I don't write these down, I'm going to forget them. I started writing and then I got into it. And what really happened was I would write about one episode and another episode and another episode. And then it just kind of, at some point, it became organic that, you know what? There's a storyline here, and there are themes here that are consistent across the board. And maybe I can start weaving these into a broader story. So that's how it started. It was piecemeal, if you will, episodic. And then the narrative arc started to just form in front of me. And I was in writing groups now and at this point and took some memoir writing classes. And then those principles all started to click, right? Because I'm kind of on the path here. And so, with some support in understanding the craft, I was able to produce a full manuscript.
And, well, a memoir, I've read quite a few memoirs and I've edited quite a few memoirs. And I think the important thing is that one is talking about one's life in a memoir, but you're also telling a story, and there needs to be a story arc,
Yes.
and characters, if I can use that, need to
Yes.
be developed. It's all based on fact, but the reader has to be taken on a journey.
That
I found that very often in not just in memoir, in fiction, that the reader sometimes for writers is a mildly curious notion.
mm,
That the author can get so into their head
right.
that the reader is pushed aside,
Right.
and one is writing for an audience. I mean, I would say that all writers want to have their works published, which is great, but whether somebody actually reads the book, this next step is buying it and they read it and complete it is another matter. And that's where there's a level of creativity that comes in.
That's very true. So there is a lot of value, right, in folks wanting to write about their lives, and people keep journals and diaries, and that's all noble, and I love that process. But when I started to realize maybe there's a broader narrative arc here, then that's where the elements of storytelling really help bring it to life. And I enjoy storytelling, and so I believe that I could really tell the story in a way that took advantage of those elements of writing, the craft of writing, right? So I applied those, but at the same time, I had to keep in mind that I'm telling the truth, right? As you tell the truth, you want to tell the truth and you don't want to veer away from it as you tell a story, right? So I thought it was a
Exactly.
bit of a balancing act, but somehow it worked where I was able to present the whole truth, but also present it the way you would tell a short story or a novel. So, yeah.
Exactly. Our lives form the plot, but there's still, people often say, oh, I have a great idea for a story, and they have some idea for a plot. There's then this gap between the idea and what ends up on the page. Have you been tempted to write fiction?
Good question. Yeah, so I actually have written a bit of short fiction. I've had some short fiction published. I enjoy that very much. So I would like to believe that someday I'm going to write a novel. Uh, I'm not quite there yet. I enjoy writing short fiction. Everyone's asking me, when are you going to write the follow up to Boy Wonder? So that's something I am thinking about. And again, the way I'm approaching it is episodic, right? I don't want to force myself into a whole narrative arc, but there are stories that I would like to remember, and I think people would enjoy reading them. I think through the organic writing process, I will get to a point where these will all connect in a way that again, sounds like a novel or another memoir like Boy Wonder was.
Well, when you finished your memoir, Boy Wonder, how did you feel? There was the whole
Mm.
point to getting it published, and then it's published.
Yeah, yeah.
And so much energy is put into the effort to get to that point. Was there a sense of loss once it was published? That you're no longer part in the process, and now the question of now what?
So when it got published by you, I was both elated because I've been working on this for so long, 20 years. And then at the same time, I was terrified, right? Because now the truth is out and I have nothing to hide. And what do people think? And what I have found is, yes, there are folks who respond with, oh my God, what is this about? But at the same time, I also got a lot of feedback about being brave and courageous about really putting your truth out there. And that I do not regret. From that perspective, I'm glad that I wrote it. And I also believe, and I have heard from some readers, that this has helped them because folks had similar stories when they were younger, and it enables them to confront these realities and maybe even address some deep seated issues tied to their upbringing. At the same time, it's also encouraged others to write their own stories, which I'm very happy to hear. We continue to build this genre of discovering our identities at a young age. And, there are a multitude of ways of doing it, and they're all wonderful stories and valid and important to share out there in the world.
How do you think, I can't profess that I know young people. I don't know people in their teens and early 20s. As always, we tend to hang with a group of people that are more age peers. So, how do you think? Have you heard from any younger readers about the
Good
book?
question. I have heard from two younger readers. One of them is a college student. Interestingly, his school newspaper actually wrote a review about Boy Wonder, and he reached out and was really effusive in his gratitude about the book. He also had no sense of what it was like growing up in the 70s and 80s. So that kind of intrigued him. And from what I could gather, he is now wanting to read other accounts and really understanding even the age of the AIDS crisis, which he has no real sense of. So I think that's a huge benefit, hearing from a young person. But I hope that it does reach out to more young people. The good news is that it's available at a number of libraries throughout the country. I continue to speak in book groups and look for opportunities to talk about the approach to writing Boy Wonder and the themes, because even though it's set in the 70s and 80s, the themes are timeless, and the experience and coming to better understand oneself will always be timeless.
It's I was thinking as you were talking that for people like of my age and your age at that time, so I came out in 1973. There wasn't a whole lot. Now there are young adult novels. There's a plethora of things about, targeted at young people. There was nothing. There was zero. And I can remember that a lot of people don't remember Barbara Giddings. The American Library Association, the Stonewall Committee, their book award is the Barbara Giddings Award. And she was not a librarian, but she compiled a list, which was a sheet of paper of books for LGBT people. So there just wasn't anything. And that's where I think these finishing schools that we all went through, like you went through at the Imperial Hotel, I went through it in Greenwich Village. That's where we learned from about, gay life and how to be. So I think younger people are very lucky now. I know that, it's not necessarily a permissive society, and it's certainly moving backwards, but there is so much more access to information, both in print and on the web. So that's a big change
It is a
for
huge change. Yeah. I'm grateful for that because, again, folks can read other people's stories and find how they relate to it. I'm all for that. And I know we're also now in a funny time where LGBTQ plus voices are a bit under attack. We know about book banning. Even now, so more than ever, we got to keep these voices out there. So any effort, any campaigns to have young people speak out, write, and get published, those are the sorts of initiatives we really need to support now more than ever.
exactly. It's one aspect I feel bad for younger people, especially people, who were born in the past 20 years when, 20, 25 years when things were easier. Those of us who were born years ago, way before that, we grew up in oppression. So we grew up in prejudice, and we learned defense mechanisms, and it was part of everyday life. So what's going on in the country now is part of everyday life. And I know in my career, I had a corporate career, I didn't come out at work. So part of, my reaction is, of course, what's going on is terrible. But part of me also says, well, who thought this wouldn't happen again?
Mm, yeah.
So, the defense mechanisms and the preparation, as opposed to all of a sudden having the rug pulled out from under you.
Mhm.
So I think I think it's very different. Have any of your work colleagues read your book?
The answer is yes. Once the word got out that Jobert had a book, there was a lot of chatter. But I am so surprised because even the CEO encouraged that there be a forum for me to talk about my book and my writing. And that has been a source of pride at the company, but also the fact that I've had many colleagues tell me how moved they were by the story, regardless of its salacious nature in some aspects. I'm grateful for, and I really appreciate that. I sometimes want to ask, well, how has it changed your view of me? But my sense is in the workplace, it hasn't. Maybe, if anything, it's been more of a positive. So even in this era, it's comforting to know that when you tell the truth, demonstrate your truth, it's a good thing all around.
Were there any authors that influenced your writing, the memoir?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will tell a very quick story. When I started writing Boy Wander, I went to a reading. It was a book signing at the bookstore called Three Lives and Company in Manhattan. And it was Edmund White. He was signing his book called The Married Man. So I wanted to get a copy. And when he signed it for me, I said to him, I really want to write and I want to write a memoir. And his words to me were, Jobert, go right. Just go right. And that I will never forget. That was kind of like a rallying cry, go right. So that was a big influence. And I loved his work, everything from, This Beautiful Room is Empty, A Boy's Life, all of that, all his
Yes.
works have been amazing. Felice Picano as well. Both of them just passed away not that long ago. They were part of the Violet Quill writing group that we all know about. So that group and their works were instrumental in my coming out as a gay man, but also in my growing as a writer.
They paved the way
For
for
sure.
when it was very hard to get published, more difficult if you had LGBT material, it was harder to get published. There were very few publishing outlets. Are there any aspects of your life that might surprise your readers that influenced your writing?
Hmm. I don't know if would surprise them. I do talk about in the book about how I was a newscaster, right, at a young age. So I actually was a bit of a child celebrity at one point in the Philippines. It was really odd. I was on television every week, and everywhere I started to go, people would ask for my signatures, my autograph, if you will. And I even went to what I call the Filipino Emmys, and we won it. So that was a bit of the limelight, wonderful. But also the other thing I wanted to talk about that period is all of a sudden, I had not realized until much later on that there were a bunch of babies being named Jobert in the Philippines because I was on television. And then you would see a Jobert's taxi or a Jobert's haberdashery. So it became a brand name, which I think is really funny. If there's anything that might surprise people, is that I was a child celebrity and I encouraged parents to name their children Jobert.
And the name was originally a nickname.
That's right. I actually was born as Jose, like my father, Jose Egbert. It's a whole story about a friend of his named Egbert. And he said, if we have a boy, we're going to name him after you. So that's how I got my name. But I couldn't take the teasing on the playground when I was very young. So I asked my parents, please change my name. And they came up with Jobert as the combination of Jose Egbert.
Yeah, I did. I know a little bit about the Philippines. I used to travel to Manila on a fairly regular basis. What I thought, so in thinking about your Catholic upbringing, I remember watching television in Manila, and it was about 10 o'clock at night. And you know how here, at least they used to do it on TV, it's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are? What came on the TV is it's 10 p.m. Have you said your rosary?
It's a very Catholic country. And again, I'll never forget Holy Week, everything would shut down. No television. You were supposed to pray. They might show one movie on Good Friday, The Robe. So, yeah, very, very, very Catholic. So much so that where I live, we believed that, you know, Virgin Mary could appear not that far away, like in Fatima or Lourdes. But again, I'm glad for the tradition, the Catholic tradition. My parents were very religious. They lived very good lives as Catholics. They instilled good principles and manners in me. But of course, as an adult, I've had to just reconcile the reality that maybe not everything about the Catholic Church was going to work well with me and my beliefs and who I was and who I am. So that comes in later in life and perhaps to be covered in a future memoir.
How has your family reacted to the book?
My parents, unfortunately, had already passed away. And, people joke with me, did you wait until your parents passed away? No, I did not. It would have been interesting if they were around. My siblings, everyone's thankful for the story I told. And I do mention them. And in a way, it's part of their history. So it's nice that it's recorded. But I'm sure there's still a bit of the wow factor of did that really happen?
What advice would you give to people who are, on the fence and thinking about writing about their lives?
Well, just right. Just like Edmund White said to me, if anything, you owe it to yourself to record what you hold in you, right? I think it's healthy, but it's also a way to just have a record of what you've experienced. It doesn't have to be for everyone. You can keep it to yourself, one. But then if you have loved ones where you want them to know the real you and what has shaped you early on, that's another wonderful way of sharing the truth. And then if you even want to go further, think about how you would develop it into a bigger story, a narrative like we talked about, right? Where it could potentially be a memoir that you would like to put out into the world.
Interesting point. I think, well, a couple of interesting points. I think that sometimes analysis, we spend a lot of time thinking, and it's actually a way to avoid doing something. I'm going to think about it. I'm going to keep thinking about it. Whereas, getting it down on paper and doing it and not caring what it's like, what it is, but getting it out there. And the second point you made is that writing about your life, writing a memoir doesn't necessarily have to be about publication. It could be something you just do for yourself. And perhaps, as with your writing, it then develops into something that is then more commercial and is published. So I think we all have stories to tell. And I think we all have, we tend to have this idea that only celebrities have interesting lives. Well, I can bet you dollars to donuts that they haven't lived my life and haven't
Nor
had
did
some of
I.
my experience. Exactly. Exactly. So I want to ask you a question that I always ask folks on our show is, when we write, we create, when books are worlds and it's an environment, and sometimes it's very close to reality, sometimes it isn't. If you could choose a book to live in, what book would you live in, or what book would you go into and visit?
So this is very timely. My partner started reading The Tale of Genji. I don't know if you know about The Tale of Genji.
I
This
do
is a
not.
book I read this book in college for Japanese literature class. It's 1,200 pages. It is set in 11th century, 10th, 11th century Japan in the Heian period. And it is known to be, apparently, I found out it was known to be one of the very first novels ever written in the world. And it was written by a woman. And what she did was talk about the Japanese aristocracy and the emperor's court. And it's the story of Genji, who is the son of the emperor. And it's about his trials and tribulations, his picadillos, like his whole life and growing up and, becoming a sexual being. So it's funny you ask that because that's the most recent piece of literature I've been talking about with my partner, and he's reading it. I don't know. I think I may want to read it again. But suffice it to say, what a time. I mean, yes, it's many years ago, but to be in the Japanese Imperial Court, not the Imperial Hotel, but the Japanese Imperial Court, and to live through those very elaborate attires and customs and the way people moved from tatami room to the tea ceremony to see the cherry blossoms. It's a bit of a fantasy, but it would be really wild to live in that environment. To answer your question in a long-winded way, I would say the tale of Genji.
Do you think, would you be a character or would you be one of those background people observing what's going on?
So when I first read about Genji, I thought, oh, Genji and I are like this, right? So maybe I could be one of Genji's confidants, right? Who is wise and knows the politics of the court and what's going on and can clue him in. Because sometimes Genji, the character, is a bit lackadaisical, like spacey, and he needs to be brought down to
His best friend.
That's it, his best friend. That's it. And
Um,
we would go gallivanting about.
It's interesting because when I've never seen myself as a character in a book, but especially when I was younger, there were lots of books I wanted to be in, but I always saw myself as a friend, a best friend, but not central to the plot. So good to know. So again, everyone, I want to thank you, Jobert, for being with us
Thank
today.
you.
Everyone, we've been in conversation and stepping between the pages of the life of Jobert Abueva. I hope I got that right.
Yep, you did.
Who has the memoir, Boy Wander, coming of age memoir. Thank you for being on our show, and hopefully we can have you back on and we can talk about some other aspects. I have lots more questions, but we could talk about some other aspects.
Sure, happy to. Thank you, Ian. Take care.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button or the bell so that you could be notified of new interviews that we're doing. Subscribing and really helps us and helps people find the podcast. So once again, thank you for being here. And we will see you out online again real soon. Thanks, everyone. Bye. You've been listening to Bold Voices, Good Yarns, brought to you by Rattling Good Yarns Press. Subscribe to our channels on Spotify and YouTube, and follow us on social media. Search for Rattling Good Yarns Press. Also, visit our website at rattlinggoodyarns.com, where you can find great reads and interesting articles about the world of books. See you soon!